Retirement used to be short, a few years of rest at the very end after a lifetime of work. That was the whole idea. But something quietly changed. A person who stops working at 62 and lives into their 90s isn't taking a few years off. They're funding a second adult life, one that can run as long as birth to college, twice over, 30 years with no paycheck. And almost nobody plans for the full length of it, because almost nobody expects to get it. Here's the strange part. Retirement, the way we picture it, is barely older than your grandparents. For most of human history, there was no such thing. You worked until your body gave out, and then your family took care of you, or you kept working, or you didn't last long. The idea of a planned, funded stretch of leisure at the end of life is a modern invention. It really took shape in the 1930s. Social Security arrived in 1935, in the middle of the Great Depression, when millions of older Americans had been wiped out. The government set a retirement age of 65, and back then, that number did a lot of quiet work. A man reaching adulthood in that era often didn't make it to 65 at all. The program was built as a backstop for the last stretch of life, not a 30-year income plan. Then came the company pension. For a few decades in the middle of the last century, a lot of Americans could count on a monthly check from their employer for life. The company carried the risk. If you lived a long time, that was the company's problem, not yours. That was the deal. And then the deal changed. Starting in the 1980s, pensions faded and the 401k took over, a retirement account you fund yourself named after a line in the tax code. The risk moved off the company's books and onto yours. Live longer than your money lasts, and now it's your problem. That one shift is the quiet engine behind almost everything that follows. So what does a 30-year retirement actually cost? Start with the plain arithmetic. Say you want to replace even a modest income, call it $50,000 a year after you stop working. Over 30 years, ignoring inflation entirely, that's $1.5 million. With inflation doing its normal work over 3 decades, the real number climbs higher, because the $50,000 you need at 65 buys a lot less at 90. Now hold that against what people actually have. The Federal Reserve's most recent survey found that the typical household aged 55 to 64, people right on the doorstep of retirement, had about $185,000 saved. That's the median, the household sitting right in the middle. The average for that same group was over $500,000. Why the enormous gap? Because average and median are not the same thing, and the difference matters a lot here. A small number of very large accounts drag the average way up. The median tells you what the person in the middle really has, and the person in the middle has nowhere near enough to self-fund 3 decades, and savings don't spend like a paycheck. A common rule of thumb planners site says you can safely pull only about 4% of your nest egg in the first year without draining it too fast. Run that against the median. 4% of $185,000 is about $7,400 a year. Call it $600 a month on top of Social Security to stretch across a retirement that might last 3 decades. That's the arithmetic a lot of households are quietly walking into. It gets starker. Roughly 1 in 4 American adults has nothing saved for retirement at all. Among people 50 and over, about 1 in 5 has zero. Meanwhile, surveys show Americans believe they need around $1.5 million to retire comfortably. Set the belief next to the balance, $1.5 million target against a $185,000 reality, and you can see the size of the gap the whole system is built on top of. There's one more cost hiding in the word average. Average life expectancy at 65 is now just under 20 more years. But average is a trap. Half of people live longer than average by definition. For a married couple, there's better than a 50-50 chance that one of them lives past 90. So planning for 20 years and hoping for the best isn't caution. It's a coin flip on the most expensive years of your life. Once the risk shifted onto individuals, a whole industry grew up to manage the money and to take a slice of it on the way through. Start with the 401k and the individual retirement account, or IRA, a personal retirement account you open yourself. Trillions of dollars sit in these accounts, and nearly all of it is invested through funds that charge an annual fee. The fees sound tiny, 1% a year, 0.5%. But run a tiny percentage across a giant balance over 30 or 40 years, and it compounds into real money, often tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes far more, quietly skimmed from a single lifetime of saving. The saver rarely notices it leave because it never shows up as a bill. It's just subtracted, a little at a time every year. Then there's the advice layer. Financial advisors, some paid a flat fee, some paid a percentage of everything they manage, some paid commissions to sell you particular products. A lot of them are genuinely useful, but the pay structures create their own pull. An advisor paid to sell you an annuity has a reason to like annuities. That doesn't make the product bad, it makes the incentive worth understanding. And annuities are the clearest example of the core problem being sold back to you. An annuity is a deal with an insurance company. You hand over a lump sum, and they promise you a monthly check for the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. In other words, you're buying back the very thing the old pension used to give you for free, protection against living too long. The insurance company pools the risk across thousands of customers. The ones who die early quietly subsidize the ones who live long. That pooling is genuinely valuable, and for some people, it's exactly the right tool. It also comes wrapped in fees, fine print, and surrender penalties that can be brutal if your plans change. Step back and the shape is clear. The employer used to carry longevity risk for free. Now that risk has been chopped up, priced, and sold back to the individual in pieces by fund managers, advisors, and insurers, each taking a cut for handling a problem that used to be somebody else's job. Who pays? So who actually pays for 30 years of life without a paycheck? The money comes from a short list of sources, and it's worth seeing them in order. First, Social Security. For most retirees, this is the foundation, a monthly check from the government based on what you earn during your working life. The average retirement benefit is somewhere around $2,000 a month. That is not a comfortable retirement on its own. It was never designed to be. Social Security was meant to replace a portion of your income, not all of it. For a lot of Americans, though, it ends up being nearly all they have, and there's a cloud over it. The trust fund that helps pay benefits is projected to run short in the early 2030s. That does not mean Social Security disappears. Payroll taxes keep flowing in and would still cover most of what's promised. But if Congress doesn't act, current projections point to an across-the-board cut of roughly a fifth to a quarter of scheduled benefits. That's a projection, not a certainty, and lawmakers have patched shortfalls before. Still, it hangs over every long retirement now. Second, your own savings, the 401k, the IRA, whatever you manage to set aside. For the household in the middle, this runs dry long before 30 years are up. Third, your home. For millions of Americans, the house is the single biggest asset they own, and a long retirement slowly converts it into cash, sold, borrowed against, or spent down on care. And fourth, the source nobody puts on a balance sheet, family, adult children who send money, or move a parent in, or cut back their own hours to help. This unpaid work is enormous, and it's invisible precisely because no bill is ever printed for it. Here's the honest part. When to lean on each source is a real choice and not an obvious one. Claim Social Security at 62 and you lock in a smaller check for life, but you collect years of payments you'd otherwise miss, which is the right move for someone in poor health or without other income. Wait until 70 and each check is much larger, but only if you can afford to wait and you live long enough to collect. There's no single correct answer. It depends on the life. What's not a choice, for many people, is running out of options entirely. The sticker price of a long retirement is bad enough. The hidden costs are what quietly break the math. Start with inflation. Over a 30-year retirement, prices roughly double at historically normal rates. The monthly budget that feels comfortable at 65 can feel tight at 80 and genuinely painful at 90, not because anything went wrong, but because the dollar simply shrank. A plan that ignores 3 decades of inflation isn't a plan, it's a snapshot. Then there's the order in which your investment returns show up, and this one is cruel because it's mostly luck. 2 people can retire with the same savings and earn the same average return over 30 years, and one runs out while the other dies rich. The difference is timing. If a bad market hits in your first few years while you're pulling money out, the losses lock in and the account never fully recovers. Retire right before a downturn, and you can be quietly ruined by arithmetic through no mistake of your own. Add the cost that Social Security and basic Medicare, the government health program for people 65 and older, largely don't cover. Long-term care. Help with daily living, whether at home or in a facility, is one of the biggest expenses of a long life, and most people are shocked to learn how little of it Medicare pays for. That gap sits and waits at the end of many long retirements, and then the cost that never appears in any budget at all. When savings run short, the shortfall doesn't vanish. It transfers, usually to family. A daughter cuts her hours to provide care and stops adding to her own retirement, so the gap simply rolls forward into the next generation. The longer the retirement, the heavier that quiet transfer tends to get. So why is it built this way? Follow the incentives. For employers, the 401k was a fantastic trade. A pension is an open-ended promise. You owe a check for as long as the retiree lives, and you carry all the risk of them living long. A 401k ends that obligation the day the worker retires. Match a few percent, and you're done. From the company's side, moving that risk onto workers wasn't cruelty. It was just cheaper and more predictable. For the financial industry, hundreds of millions of individual accounts, each needing funds, advice, and products, is a vastly bigger business than a few thousand corporate pension plans ever were. More accounts, more fees, more customers who need help solving a problem they didn't used to have to solve alone. And for the government, Social Security was designed for a very different shape of population. Many workers supporting relatively few retirees, most of whom didn't collect for very long. That shape is inverting. Baby boomers are retiring, birth rates have fallen, and people are living longer. Fewer workers now support more retirees for more years each. The strain on the system isn't a glitch. It's demographics doing exactly what demographics do, slowly and predictably. Put it together and the logic is coherent, even if the result is hard. Longevity risk, the risk of living a long time and needing money the whole way, got shifted from institutions built to absorb it onto individuals who mostly can't. That's the quiet choice sitting underneath the whole thing. So what is the 30-year retirement really? It's one of the greatest achievements of the modern age, decades of life, that earlier generations simply never got, bolted onto a financial system that was never designed to fund it. The math is honest about who wins and who absorbs the strain. The people best positioned are the ones with old-style pensions, high savings, or enough wealth to buy their way out of longevity risk. Everyone else is asked to solve alone and in advance a problem that used to be shared and to guess correctly how long they'll live while doing it. None of this means a long life is a burden or a mistake. Living into your 90s is a gift. The problem isn't the years. It's that the system quietly handed each person the full risk of those years and called it freedom. And the single most expensive thing you can do in retirement is the one thing everyone is hoping for: to live a very long time. If this breakdown made the numbers a little clearer, take a second to like the video and subscribe. We take apart one piece of the economics of growing old in America at a time.